Good afternoon, and welcome to today's webcast on vessels e-NOI, answers to a few key VGP questions, and strategies to meet the requirements of the VGP. This webcast is sponsored by EPA's Office of Wastewater Management. I'm Ryan Albert with EPA, Water Permits Division, and I will moderate today's session and answer a few frequently asked questions we have received at EPA. Thank you for joining us. We'll get started in a few moments. While we wait for others to join, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. First, this webcast is designed to assist permittees with meeting the terms of EPA's Final Vessel General Permit, or VGP. The Final Vessel General Permit supporting information is available on EPA's webpage at www.epa.gov/NPDES/vessels. Nothing in this presentation is intended as a substitute for the information provided in the Final Vessel General Permit or the VGP fact sheet. In the event of any conflict between the information provided in this presentation and the VGP or VGP fact sheet, the permit and fact sheet are regarded as authoritative. Additionally, we at EPA note that the thoughts and opinions of all of today's speakers are their own. EPA does not necessarily endorse the statements made by our speakers in today's webcast. For those of you new to EPA's NPDES webcast, I wanted to briefly summarize some of the webcast features. First, if you have any technical difficulties, you can call 1-800-833-2812 or click the Help button to receive technical support from On24, our webcast vendor. If you're calling internationally, please call 1-415-829-5211. The event number for this webcast is 155969. Please use this number when requesting assistance so that On24 staff will know which webcast you're watching. You may also ask a question area to post any technical issues you're experiencing. Please include a telephone number where you can be reached and we will help you troubleshoot your problem. We will have several question and answer sessions during the webcast. To ask a question, simply type your question in the text box located in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. Then click on the Submit Question button. You don't need to wait until the question and answer period to submit your questions. In fact, we encourage you to submit your questions early. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible. Due to the high number of participants, all questions will not be answered. However, today's speaker's contact information is provided on your screen should you have questions following the webcast. Additionally, if you have specific questions about the Vessel General Permit, please send an email to commercialvesselpermit@epa.gov. There will also be several occasions when our presenters will ask you questions. These poll questions will appear in the slide window. Please submit your answers in that same slide window, not in the Ask a Question box. To see closed captioning, click on the Closed Captioning button on the lower left corner of your screen. At the end of the webcast, you'll be asked to complete an evaluation survey. Please click on the Enlarge Slides button in order to see the completed survey. Now we are ready to kick off this session. We are very excited to have today's speakers. They are Jenny Jackson, Kuldeep Singh, Jonathan Turvey, and Lorena Johnston. I've had the pleasure of hearing each of them discuss their VGP activities and believe that each has information to share with you which you will find valuable. Jennifer Jackson has been with EPA for over a year as an intern and has been recently permanently hired to manage EPA's e-NOI system in the Water Permits Division. Jennifer earned a BS in Environmental Science from Gettysburg College and a Master's in Environmental Management from Duke University. Kuldeep Singh is the Director of Marine Operations and Technical Services at Gallagher Marine Systems. Kuldeep is responsible for client technical services, including port captaincy, vessel audits, inspections and crew training. He's also the commander for oil spill incidents. Kuldeep has 14 years' experience as a marine superintendent and port captain, over 21 years of seagoing experience. Jonathan Turvey has worked in the environmental field for over 25 years with positions in both government and private industry working with EPA, the Boeing Company, and since 2003 with Holland America Line. Since joining Holland America Line, Jonathan has emphasized environmental training, policy development, environmental auditing, and environmental management systems. Holland America Line received ISO 14001 certification in 2006. More recently, Jonathan has focused on vessel permitting issues, first in Alaska and now with the EPA Vessel General Permit. Jonathan earned a BS in economics from the University of Puget Sound in 1981 and a master's in business administration from Seattle University in 1993. And finally, last but not least, Lorena Johnston has been with Vane Brothers since August 2006. As a compliance administrator for the Health, Safety, and Environmental Department, Lorena ensures that requirements from other government agencies, customers, and Vane's internal safety management system are met. She also maintains existing HSE programs along with implementing new ones in order to keep up with continually changing regulations. In addition to her work at Vane Brothers, Lorena is actively involved in the maritime community as a member of the Baltimore Port Alliance Environmental Committee. She attended the Universidad Juan Agustín Mazza in Mendoza, Argentina, where she studied industrial engineering. So with that, we will start with Jenny Jackson's presentation, where she will first begin discussing the vessel's e-NOI system.
Thank you, Ryan, for that introduction. And hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer Jackson, and I am the new manager and overseer of the Electronic Notice of Intent System at EPA. And today I will talk to you about, first of all, who needs to file a Notice of Intent, otherwise called an NOI, and then I will walk you through the steps of how to file an NOI electronically for the vessel general permit. And most importantly, I will point out some important tips in order to allow you to have a smooth e-NOI experience. So to start, certain vessels that are discharging to waters of the U.S. need to seek coverage under the NPDES Vessel General Permit. And in order to do so, a vessel owner or operator needs to file a Notice of Intent. And there are certain criteria that certain vessels need in order to apply for coverage, and I listed the criteria here. So if you are a vessel greater than or equal to 300 gross tons, or vessels that have capacity to hold discharge more than 8 cubic meters of ballast water, then you need to file an NOI, and the submittal deadline is September 19th, 2009, to submit your NOI. So there are two ways to submit an NOI. You can either submit one by mail to the Notice of Intent NOI Processing Center, or you can file one electronically. And I highly encourage you to file your Notice of Intent electronically. The e-NOI system is a free online service that allows people applying for coverage to apply to get your Notice of Intent. Sorry, and there's several benefits to applying using the e-NOI system. I don't know how many people are an Office fan, which is a sitcom, but I have a picture from that show, just showing stacks and stacks of paper, basically so we can do our part to reduce the amount of paper used. So it's better to use the e-NOI system. So anyways, the best benefit to using the e-NOI system is because it will take a shorter time to process your NOI and receive coverage, potentially up to 2 weeks faster than using the mailing service. There are also online instructions and help menus to guide you through the certification process in the e-NOI system. And there's also a batch upload feature to assist people filing an NOI if you have a significant number of NOIs that need to be filled out. You can also modify forms after submitting your NOI to EPA, and you can also save your forms as drafts so you can complete them at a later time. Okay, so getting started, to file an NOI, you want to go to EPA's NPDES Vessels e-NOI website, which is epa.gov/NPDES/vessels/e-NOI. And once you get to the site, you will see an e-NOI icon, which is on the slide there, and you can click that, and you will be brought to what's called the Central Data Exchange System. The e-NOI system is supported by EPA's Central Data Exchange System, and you will be brought to the screen here, and you have faced with two places to click. If you are already registered with CDX and have an account, you will click the first button, or the second button, I should say. And if you are new to CDX and want to register, you click the first button. Okay, so most people will probably be new to CDX. So after you click register, you will want to enter your name, create a username and password, and then you also want to decide on a secret question and answer. So in case you forget your username and password, you can answer the secret question and retrieve it. I do highly recommend you make sure you remember your username and password and write it down somewhere, and also write down your secret answer so you don't forget it. And then the next page, after you click continue, you will enter your address and your email address and your phone number. If you are outside the United States or Canada, enter DC instead of any other place. And also enter 0 in the zip code, postal code text box if none exists. And let me emphasize that the email address that you use is probably the most important thing to remember and to select. You do not want to use a shared email address or a company email address because EPA will be corresponding to you through this email address. And also, by using a shared email address, there's a chance that other people could apply for CDX, for a CDX account, and they might use that email address, and then you might have an account lockout system, which would be bad. So make sure the email address you use is your own and that you remember it. And another thing to note about the email address is that if you forget your username and password, a lot of times people will think, oh, okay, well, I'll just create a new account and use the same email address. But that's a big problem because the e-NOI system knows your email address, and then if you create two accounts with the same email address, it's going to get confused, and you could face what's called an account lockout, and you won't be able to get in and see your NOIs. So make sure you create one account, and if you forget your username and password, to contact the CDX help desk, which I will provide to you that information at the end of my presentation. Okay, so you are almost done registering. You will then be brought to an Add Program page, which you will see various programs that you can add. The one you want to click on is Stormwater Notice of Intent e-NOI, SWE-NOI. To click that, to add that program. And then you will be brought to an Add Program ID page. And basically, you just want to click the state that you are in. And if you're not in the United States or Canada, just simply for now, select DC and add that one. Okay, you are registered for CDX, and you will be brought to the My CDX page, where you can change your password, edit personal information, edit current account profiles, or add new employer profile. But in order to file an NOI, you want to click SWE NOI, SWE NOI, or Stormwater e-NOI there. And then you will be brought to the next page, and you'll have a choice of either clicking Stormwater e-NOI or Vessels e-NOI. And you want to click Vessels e-NOI and click Next. Okay, so you are at the Vessel e-NOI page, and you can do one of two things here. You can either file an NOI, or you can view an existing NOI that you are working on or filling out. So at the top of the screen, it says Apply for Coverage under an EPA Vessel General Permit, and that's how you start to file your NOI, and you will answer some of the criteria questions. And you'll also see a question there that says Employer Identification Number, EIN, which is also known as a Federal Tax Identification Number. And not everyone will have an EIN number, but that's a unique 9-digit number assigned by the United States Internal Revenue Service, IRS. So if this does not apply to you, you do not have to answer that. You can still file your NOI. Notice that if you do have questions about, if you're not sure what a question means, pretty much every single one of these questions will have a little red circle with a question mark in it, and you can click on it, and it will tell you more information about the question. And if you're still confused, there is up at the top a little menu, and your options are Home, Help, Profile, and Logout. And the Help button, you can click that, and you can search by keyword to help with your questions. And then also note that on the side, there's a toolbar that might help you answer some questions. Who must file an NOI? How do I obtain coverage? What is the e-NOI process? When should I submit an NOT, notice of termination? How do I change my account information? And then, of course, information on the vessel general permit website and downloading the VGP PDF application. So notice also, at the top you can apply for an NOI. At the bottom you can search an NOI, or you can see your NOI by it lists the tracking number, the date of coverage, the postmark date, owner-operator name, vessel identifier, and vessel name. And it also has certain statuses that the NOI will be in, and it could either be in draft form, submitted. Draft form means you're still filling out your NOI. Submitted means that you submitted the NOI to be certified. Confirm means the NOI is ready for the permit, the NOI to be certified, and then certified means that the certifying official has certified the NOI, and then active means the permit is ready to, you have coverage under the permit. Okay, so some people might be confused because you can either be one of two people when filing an NOI. You can either be a staff person or a certifying official. And the staff, and both the certifying official and the staff member can file an NOI. However, the certifying official is the person who will approve and sign the NOI. And the staff person can be pretty much any member working under the owner or operator, and the certifying official is technically the person who performs the policy or management decision, makes the policy or management decisions which govern the operation of the vessel, and that person can be the owner or operator of the vessel. Oh, and I'm sorry, real quick, to select your role, click on the profile button up at the top, and then you can change your role to certifier, or the staff. Okay, so Section 1 of filing your NOI is the owner-operator information. You want to type in the vessel owner-operator name and address, and you also want to type in a vessel company email. And then at the bottom, there's something called a point of contact name, which is the name of the person other than the certifying official who is authorized to view the vessel's notice of intent and is able to answer any questions about the vessel's discharge. This person could be a staff person within the owner-operator's organization, such as a vessel master, vessel manager, or fleet manager. Okay, Section 2 is vessel information. You want to fill out the name of your vessel, the vessel identifier number, which can be the vessel ID, registered number, or vessel IMO number, or another form of identification. You also want to fill in the type of vessel, and this actually will automatically have clicked, be assigned, because on the first page when you file your NOI, you're going to already select what your vessel is, what type it is. So if it's different, click the previous button and reselect what type of vessel you have. You also want to put in the weight, and you also want to put in the ballast water capacity on this page. Okay. You also want to put in the year the vessel was built, the date of the last dry dock, and the next anticipated dry dock, whether the vessel has an onboard treatment system for waste stream, how often the ballast tank is cleaned, where do you typically dispose ballast tank sediment, if the vessel has ballast water management plan currently, and the type of anti-fouling hull coat used, when it was last applied, and the husbandry practices for that. You also want to click whether your vessel ever held an NPDES permit before, and if so, I think you put in the date of coverage, and also the transfer of ownership, if this is the transfer of ownership. And also here, I circled on this page the Save as Draft. This is going to be on every page when you file an NOI. But anytime you want to stop and continue later, you can save your NOI as a draft. Okay. So Section 3, Vessel Voyage Info. List your home port and most frequently used port, U.S. ports of anticipated visits during the permit term, number of passengers, crew, and the maximum number of passenger and crew that you might have, and also whether the vessel travels beyond the EEZ, also known as, which is more than 200 nautical miles from any shore, and if the vessel is engaged in the Pacific nearshore voyages. Section 4 is discharge information. You want to check any and all of these discharges that may apply to your vessel that they might generate. And you also want to check if the vessel is engaged in industrial operations and whether the vessel will be using an experimental ballast water treatment system, which discharges residual or biocides or derivatives. Okay, you're almost done. So you will be brought, once you finish Section 4, you're going to be brought to the review page. And you want to look over all your information and make sure it's everything's in order and as complete and accurately filled out. And once you've done that, you can click Confirm and Continue. And you will be brought to one of two pages depending on whether you are the staff or certifying official. If you are registered as staff, you're going to be brought to an initial page. If you have yet designated a certifying official, you're going to be asked to fill out who the certifying official's name is, their title, and their email address. Now, this is very important. Make sure the email address that you fill out is the same one that the certifying official put as his or her email address when they created their CDX account. If you think that you put in the right one but actually didn't, then the NOI will not get sent to them, or the e-NOI system will not recognize that email address. If there's already been a certifier recognized, you might be brought to the bottom screen, and you can either select a certifying official that's been listed, or you can enter a new person. Okay, if you are the certifying official, you'll be brought to one of two screens. If this is your first time reviewing and signing an NOI, you will be asked to answer or asked to create two security questions for yourself, and make sure you remember those answers, because in the future when you are certifying an NOI, you will be asked those questions and you will need to know those answers. So either fill out those questions and answers, or answer the questions that you've chosen for yourself, and then you can accept and continue. And then you have completed the NOI, and you'll be brought to a confirmation page, and then you will receive a thank you email, which will be generated automatically, and then you can go back to the main home page, and you will see your permit tracking number under the tracking number section, and then you can scroll over to actions, and you can click view, and then you can see a review page of your NOI, and there's also a history tab. You can click on that, and you can either see a PDF of your NOI, and you can also see the NOI acknowledgement letter. Okay, real quickly, I'm going to go over the batch upload feature. This is for users who are planning on submitting a significant number of NOIs, and when I say significant numbers, it's pretty much 100 or over 100 NOIs at the same time. So we've created a batch upload spreadsheet, which is a template designed in the Microsoft Excel 2003. So I recommend updating your Excel if you have Microsoft Excel software, if you have 1999 version. So try to have the most updated version. And this batch upload is for users who have numerous vessels and have much of their data already gathered in an existing database, and is designed for users who have experience using a database. And for those who do not really fit that criteria, who have less than 100 or don't have much of their data already in a database, we recommend using the standard e-NOI interface. And note we have directions for you on how to use the batch upload feature, and those instructions are at the Vessel e-NOI website, www.epa.gov/npds/vessels/e-NOI, and that's also where the batch upload tool is as well. So both the instructions and the batch upload tool is there. And let me stress two important things. One is to please read the batch upload instructions carefully before filling out the template. And also, when you finish putting all your data in the template, to save a copy of the data in Excel format, because that way you have a backup in case something happens. And that's before converting the batch upload template to the CSV format, which we'll be asked to do. And there's instructions on how to do that in the batch upload instruction sheet. So once you've created your batch upload document, you will, if you are the staff person, under the page, at the home page of the Vessel e-NOI system, it says Apply for Coverage under EPA Vessel General Permit. There's a button here that says For batch upload, please click Batch Upload button, and you will click that button. If you are not the staff person, you're the certifying official, you can change your role. So you can go to the profile button up at the top and click that, and it will again ask you if you want to change your role from staff to certifying official, or vice versa. But again, only the staff person has access to the batch upload function. So it's possible that you might have some questions. There's two different places you can go if you have questions. If you have registration questions, you want to talk, you can visit the CDX Frequently Asked Questions link, which is provided, or you can contact CDX either by telephone, 888-890-1995, or you can send an email to EPACDX@csc.com with technical support in the subject line. Now, if you have questions regarding the e-NOI system, you want to contact first, I recommend checking the website for information, the NPDES Vessels website, or contact the EPA's NOI Processing Center using the telephone 866-352-7755, or email technical support at NOI@avanticorporation.com. And there's also a web form you can use online to ask questions, and that's at www.epa.gov/npds/NOI contact. And I will be CC'd on most of these questions that you send emails to. Okay.
Great. Well, with that, Jeannie, we're getting a lot of questions about the e-NOI system coming in. I know a lot of folks have a lot of questions, and they range from everything from somebody asked if they have 7 vessels, could they still use the batch upload feature, which the answer there is yes, they can. It's just if they choose to do it, it's not the most user-friendly approach, to questions ranging from applicability of the e-NOI system. So I'll go on and ask you the first one here. The question is from Michael, is what is the purpose of the e-NOI system? Is this a one-time submission per vessel?
It is not a one-time submission process. You can use the e-NOI system anytime from now in the future, and anytime I think the vessel permit will be coming out every 5 years, I believe. Is that correct, Ryan?
It will be reissued once every 5 years.
Reissued once every 5 years, so you will be submitting an NOI potentially every 5 years, and once you've created your account in CDX, you can use it forevermore to go in and file another NOI. You can also terminate an NOI. You can edit an NOI. There's a lot of functions you can use, and this is not a one-time function for sure.
Okay. Whitney has a question. We will be submitting e-NOIs for multiple clients. Should I set up an account for each client?
That's a good question. Again, it's probably best to set up an account maybe for each client, because that way they can have their own email address, and if you clump it together for sure with one email address, then that could be a problem with accounts in the future, especially if things change. So I highly suggest setting up separate accounts.
Good. Another question from Matthew. Is it beneficial to fill out information beyond the required fields? What are the ramifications of only returning required information?
Okay, that's a very good question, actually. Basically, we encourage you to fill out as much information as possible. The reason why not all of the fields have a little, if the question has an asterisk next to it, that means that you need to fill it out. But the reason why a lot of questions don't have that little required asterisk next to it is because not every question applies to the person filing the NOI. And like, for example, that EIN number question on the first page. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the information is not required. It simply means that not every question applies to that person or vessel. So again, we just encourage you to fill out as much information that applies to you.
Great. And then the final question we'll take today on the e-NOI is from Robert, and he says, must an NOI be filed even if you do not plan on discharging ballast water, but you meet the requirements for filing an NOI?
If you meet the requirements for filing an NOI, then you need to file an NOI, is my question. Any other questions that you have that I haven't really clarified today, please either use the vessel general permit email address, or you can send a question to the NOI Processing Center, and I will be CC'd on it, and I will address it if the NOI Processing Center has not.
Great. Excellent. Thank you very much, Jenny. With that, we'd like to take the opportunity to ask you all some questions. And the first one's really just to get a sense of how many audience members we have today. So the question is, the first poll question we're going to ask you all is, how many people are participating today at your location? Is it just one? Do you have 2 to 5? Do you have 6 to 10, 10 to 20, or more than 20 people? We've heard stories. We've been talking to some of our contacts out there, and we've heard stories of there are some folks in Hong Kong on this webcast right now who went out for a nice dinner and maybe a drink and are listening in to us today. We'll see if they pop up, if they actually do have a group together out there or not. Okay. So we've got our results in. It looks like most folks are on the computer by themselves. We do have quite a few small groups of 2 to 5, 30.4% of you. And then it looks like we don't have any large groups. So to the group in Hong Kong, we'll find out if you all actually were on a little bit later. Okay. To the next question. If you're required to submit NOIs, have you already submitted NOIs for your vessel? And the answers are, yes, I have submitted NOIs for all of my vessels. Yes, I have submitted NOIs for some of my vessels, but not all of them. No, I still need to submit NOIs and have fewer than 10 to submit. No, I still need to submit NOIs and have between 10 and 99 to submit. No, I still need to submit NOIs and have between 100 and 1,000 to submit. And no, you need to submit more than 1,000 NOIs. And if you need to do this, we definitely understand that it's quite a task you have in front of you. We're asking this question. We just want to get a sense. As of Friday, we have more than 8,000 vessels have NOIs submitted for them. We're trying to get a sense. How many more vessels do we have coming in the next little bit? See how accurate our original estimates were. So the answers here, it looks like quite a few of you actually have already submitted NOIs for all of your vessels, 12.3%. Some of you are in process, about 7%. And then the rest of you all still need to submit your NOIs, with a few of you only having a few NOIs to submit. And it looks like 19% having more than 100 NOIs to submit. So we will still be expecting a significant volume of NOIs to be coming into the NOI Center over the next 2 months. So the next question, how are you planning to submit your NOIs, or how did you submit your NOIs? Are you planning on using the e-NOI interface? Will you be using the batch upload tool, or do you plan on using the paper forms? As Jenny mentioned, we really are highly encouraging folks to use the e-NOI interface, or if they choose to use a slightly less user-friendly batch upload feature, to go with this approach. The paper forms will be not be the most high priority. As you all can imagine, we're expecting somewhere between 30 and 50,000 NOIs to be filed, and we have significant resource constraints on our end. So in order to be to serve the most customers the most effectively, we will be prioritizing those electronic forms over the paper forms. Okay. It looks like the majority of you are planning on using the e-NOI interface. It's about 64%. 31% are planning on using the batch upload tool, and 4% of you are planning on using the paper forms. Good. Well, that's very good. Well, that's good. Thank you very much for filling out that information. That's very helpful for us as we plan to move forward in our planning for what we're doing with the e-NOI system. And so with that, I'm going to run through a few frequently asked questions. Now, for those of you who participated on our last webcast, I said we were assembling a document of frequently asked questions, and we hope to have it out in a month. And unfortunately, we did not realize the complexity of the questions nor the volume of the questions we'd be getting from you. So I can say we are still working on it. This is going to be a taste of some of those questions. And I'm basically going to read off the questions off of a list here, and I do apologize. They're a bit verbose and perhaps a bit legalese, but I think it's best to give you the clear answer. The first question we're getting a lot. For the purposes of VGP, what constitutes a voyage? And for the purposes of the VGP, a voyage is defined as the trip beginning when the vessel is at dock or other location and ready to load cargo or passengers, and ending after it has been unloaded and loaded at dock or other location in preparation for new passengers or cargo. For vessels such as oil and gas rigs, which are a mode of transportation only when relocating between drill sites, a voyage is defined to begin when the rig departs one site and ends when it arrives at the new site and begins operations such as drilling, which are not transportation-oriented. For vessels such as barges on the Mississippi River, a voyage begins when the barge has cargo loaded onto it and ends when the cargo is later unloaded. So a voyage can actually be quite lengthy on a river system such as the Mississippi River. To the next question. Where the owner and the operator of a vessel differ, who is ultimately responsible for permit compliance? And this question actually closely relates to the fourth question, which I'll talk about in a minute as well here. But generally, the person with the ultimate operational control is responsible for compliance with the permit. In the simplest example, where the owner and operator are one, that entity is the responsible person under the permit. In situations where the vessels are leased for short terms, the operator may vary dependent upon the specific circumstances. In cases of very short-term leases, that's one voyage less than a week, the owner will most likely have control over maintenance and will be left responsible for compliance as the permittee as the operator. However, the party leasing the vessel would still be required to abide by the permit's prohibitions and limitations. In other situations where a vessel is leased for a longer term, the person leasing the vessel will generally be considered the operator and is the party responsible for compliance with the general permit. This will be especially important under the permit's inspection requirements. Visual inspections are required once per voyage or at a minimum once per week. And once again, the fourth question I'm going to answer could have actually gone first. It has some very relevant pieces of that question as well. To the third question. In the case of a vessel being towed by another vessel owned by a different company, which company is responsible for NPDES permit compliance issues? And typically we get this question most often in the context of a tug pushing a barge up a river system. Coverage under the VGP is required for each vessel's discharges. The company with operational control over a given vessel will be responsible for complying with a permit. If the owner of the vessel being towed has control of its discharges, then that person is responsible for obtaining permit coverage for the towed vessel and complying with the conditions in the permit. However, the operator of the towing vessel may also be liable for complying with the terms of the permit for the towed vessel when they have operational control of this towed vessel. In the case of some discharges from the towed vessel, both the owner and the towed vessel and the operator of the towing vessel are responsible for NPDES compliance. So both entities can be responsible for compliance. This will be the case where both the owner of the towed vessel and the operator of the towing vessel can also be considered operators of that towed vessel. Now, there are multiple mechanisms by which you can have operational control, and one of these mechanisms is you can do it via contractual mechanisms. These contractual mechanisms may help determine whether an owner should be considered an operator because it has an operational control of the vessel activities or has day-to-day operational control of those activities. So to the fourth question, this one we get quite frequently. Who has to submit the NOI? Well, as Jenny talked about, for vessels over greater than 300 gross tons, or that have the capacity to hold more than 8 cubic meters of ballast water, they must file an NOI. Under the existing NPDES regulations, if a vessel is owned by one person but is operated by another, it is operator's duty to obtain permit coverage and apply and seek the NOI. However, for the purposes of the vessel general permit, an operator will be any party, including an owner or charterer by demise, who has operational control over vessel activities, including the ability to modify those activities, or has day-to-day operational control of those activities that are necessary to ensure compliance with the permit or to direct workers carry out activities required to comply with the permit. Therefore, any entity who meets this definition may submit an NOI for a vessel. Under many circumstances, the owner maintains or can maintain, via some of these other mechanisms we just discussed, operational control over their vessel's activities and can thus submit the NOI for that vessel fleet. To the fifth question, there are only 7 of these, so it's not too brutal today. Next question. Is a written document provided to confirm submittal and receipt of the NOI? And the answer is yes. If the NOI is submitted electronically, the system will provide an electronic confirmation that the NOI was received, and you should receive this in very short order. If the NOI is submitted after September 19, 2009, a notice will be provided within the 30-day period to confirm that the vessel is authorized to discharge under the VGP. The status of the pending NOI will also be available ultimately once we develop our online search system, and it will also be available for the permittee to search through our online system. To the next question. How must vessels calling in multiple states address individual state requirements under the Section 401 certification, which, if you all recall, is Part 6 of the permit? Prior to entering a state's waters, vessels should review that state's requirements located in Part 6 of VGP in order to ensure that any discharge will be in compliance with those requirements. We cannot emphasize enough, if you will be operating in a state's waters, be sure to read Part 6 of the permit. Look to see if that state has included additional requirements, and if that state has included additional requirements, to be sure to read through them. Some of these requirements are quite substantial and will require some modification of your current activities. And finally, the last question. How will EPA apply this permit to vessels that travel the U.S. only very rarely, let's say less than once a year? Will there be flexibility of some sort? Exemptions granted, for instance? And the answer is no. The permit does not differentiate among vessels based on the frequency or length of travel within U.S. waters. Vessels greater than 79 feet that are not commercial fishing vessels that discharge ballast water must obtain a permit for their discharges to incidental to normal operation. Now, very briefly, I'll say one of the other questions we've gotten is what about vessels that engage in international voyage and only come to U.S. waters once every year or once every 2 years? Do they have to do the weekly inspections worldwide? We will be answering that question, the frequently asked question document. But the very short answer here and how this relates to you all is if the minute the vessel crosses into U.S. waters, it must be in compliance with all terms of the permit. This means at that moment, all effluent limits must meet the effluent limits contained within the permit. And things such as your annual inspection, so let's say you need to do a routine inspection on that voyage, need to have been completed on the voyage prior to entering U.S. waters or within the last week, no later than a week before. The annual inspection needs to have been conducted within the previous 12 months, and the dry dock inspection needs to have been done on your previous dry docking. So these are sorts of questions you all can expect more of. I do apologize we haven't gotten these out sooner. We do hope to prioritize them over the next little bit, and we will make them available on our webpage once we finish them. So with that, I will turn the presentation over to Jonathan Turvey, who will discuss some of the specific issues he's found within the Vessel General Permit.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to meet with you all today in one way, shape, or form. And just a bit of background, I work for Holland America Line. It's a cruise ship company based out of Seattle, Washington, currently operating 14 large cruise ships, so we're subject to the Section 5 requirements of the permit. And, from there, we'll just move forward. What I'd like to talk about today, in my experience with really any permit, I found that there's what I kind of call a buried treasure or hidden treasures in every permit, and so I'm going to talk about a few of the gems that we found as we go through our permit. Really on a daily basis, we kind of are finding new and different things, and to stay within the time frames here, we're going to limit my discussion to sort of these four elements. One is sort of the basic understanding that really the most significant changes that we've implemented have been really administering the permit as opposed to sort of the shipboard best management practices on board. We found that by and large our practices had already reflected most of those requirements. So on board we found the implementation to be something quite digestible, if you will. One of the areas that we have found in talking with a lot of other operators is, as in fact with all EPA-issued discharge permits, there are standard permit conditions or other conditions that are adopted by reference. And there are some very significant requirements contained there that people need to be aware of. I've been asked a little bit about what our experience had been relative to quarterly sampling, and this is specific to vessels discharging underneath the gray water standards, gray water and gray water mixed with sewage standards under Section 5. So I'll talk about that. And then talk a lot about sort of the determination of noncompliance, which really feeds into the annual reporting of noncompliance and some of the lessons we've learned there as best we can. So with that, let's begin. What we really have found then is that the BMP's largely reflected industry practice. Certainly the large cruise line industry has been subject to considerable regulatory and public scrutiny over the last really 10 years. And in fact, a significant portion of the industry is ISO 14000 certified, not just Holland America, but virtually all of the Carnival family and Royal Caribbean and several of the others. So we found that many of the requirements are ones that we were already conducting, and so in that respect, there wasn't so much there. What we did need to do really was build new administrative processes to address things as we've described there, such as routine visual inspections, corrective action, annual noncompliance reporting is going to be an interesting effort towards the end of the year, and other record keeping. And so for that respect, in pushing these requirements out to our fleet, it's been a relatively simple process. But you do get some issues that crop up. One of the issues we talk about with routine visual inspections, things like what's a voyage, which is a question that has already been answered, have come up, or even as we fill out forms, we'll find that what appears to be a simple form, when you write it on your desktop, becomes a little bit more difficult to implement when you get out on board. And also as well what I call the in and out itineraries, where we have vessels that are sailing in and out of permit waters on an almost daily basis. What is required and when, and what are the implications relative to compliance and annual reporting and things like that are pretty significant. And so one of the things I'd really highlight in that regard is as you're developing those forms, and that's really probably the best and only way you can develop a standard process around that, you really will need to go out into the field and just sort of have a look at how people are implementing them, because invariably people are going to have different ideas than you had in your mind when you develop the form or the process. So it's going to take more than just pushing the paperwork out to the ship. In terms of quarterly monitoring, here I'm talking about the quarterly visual monitoring on board, where there's a requirement for those discharges that are released under the waterline, the requirement to go and have a look and see to the extent that discharge is accessible on board. One of the things we have found, some of our ships have gone to extraordinary lengths to access a discharge from a particular tank or a particular discharge, and we've sort of maybe dialed them back about that and said, that's really probably not a safe or reasonable thing to expect, and so in one case or another we may have asked them to not really put themselves in that position in the future. But then the other question is, what are they looking for? And I think really the answer is, what would you expect to see? And if you see something else, then that is something to start raising questions. And so far, we haven't really had any issues crop up from that. But it is a requirement to get it done. One of the things, just based on some of the discussion that's had already, when we have a ship, and we do have a couple of ships that are maybe in U.S. waters for 2 days a year, the routine visual inspections are done the week before they re-enter for sure. The quarterly monitoring is a little bit of a different one, and the guidance I've given, and I'd be curious to hear Dr. Ryan's input on this as well, is say you certainly need to have initiated that in the quarter, the present quarter when you arrive. And then we will assure that they will have completed that before the conclusion of that quarter, even if they have sailed away and won't be back in the U.S. waters for some period of time. So we will have quarterly monitoring documented for every quarter in which a vessel sails in permit waters. Though, unless I hear otherwise, Dr. Ryan can tell me his ideas later, but not necessarily will be done before that vessel actually enters permit water. Having said that, so far that hasn't been too difficult to implement, and people have been working forward there. I was asked previously to discuss the quarterly analytical sampling that we do relative to our gray water and gray water mixed with sewage. And I should back that up a little bit. Our strategy has been at this point then, for those of you who don't know, we have some very advanced wastewater purification systems on board that provide an absolutely outstanding discharge. And that said, for most of the itineraries that we sail in the lower 48 and Hawaii, even what have you, we certainly have storage capacity on board and can hold on to our water until we sail outside of permit waters. And so even though we have in the past discharged even one alongside say in Florida or in the Caribbean, we won't be doing that anymore, just as a risk management decision, because we have ample storage and we can just hold the discharge till we get offshore. The exception is Southeast Alaska, where we're in side permit waters in the Alexander Archipelago for 3 to 4 days at a time, and we're really stressing on some vessels and some itineraries their discharge storage capacity. And as well, then, if they weren't able to discharge in permit waters, then they would have to make excursions outside of permit waters, which would result in a little bit higher fuel costs and scheduling issues. So, of course, in Alaska, it's been subject to sampling and monitoring requirements for a number of years federally, and then last year, the state of Alaska issued a permit addressing specifically gray water and black water. So for those ships sailing in Alaska, for 2 quarters a year, really, April, May, June, and then July, August, September, we conduct sampling upwards of 2 or sometimes 3 times per month, depending on the number of different requirements. And one of the subtleties that gets in there is certainly in the state of Alaska, and then it makes sense as well with applicable to the EPA permit, samples that are drawn when not in permit waters, at least by the state of Alaska's count, would determine not to be representative of a discharge in the state of Alaska. And it's their answer to the enforcement complications that would ensue from trying to take enforcement on a sample drawn, say, when in British Columbia. And so they required that those samples be taken while actually discharging in the state of Alaska. And what that means is, and we've had this occur any number of times, where if we get a result or have a couple of results where maybe the monthly average for, say, BOD exceeds the monthly average limit, then that would be a violation or an exceedance of the Alaska permit. But if we had additional samples that would bring that monthly average down, yet those samples were not taken while discharging in Alaska, they wouldn't count. And we've seen that on more than one occasion. I guess oddly enough, we have not seen it go the other way, where we happen to have really good results in Alaska, but not so good results outside of Alaska. In any event, that's a complication that we wrestle with every time it comes up, because it seems like each situation is a bit unique. So in the end, and by the time we submit our reporting to EPA, one of the big things we're going to need to do is sort through which samples apply and which ones don't, and go from there. Moving on to discuss sort of the standards adopted by reference, there are 3 places where the general permit adopts requirements by reference, and they have some pretty significant impact on the permit. And so I really encourage all of you to redouble your efforts to make sure that you're fully cognizant of what those requirements are. The first are the standard permitting conditions found at 40 CFR Part 122.41, and those conditions apply to every NPDES permit ever issued by EPA, and there are some significant requirements. Similarly, in 40 CFR 122, there are some signatory requirements that are pretty important, and that's how they define everything from the responsible corporate official and who needs to sign what piece of paper. And then relevant to those ships discharging under the Section 5 gray water standards, the secondary treatment standards then found in Part 133 also apply. So those are pretty important to be mindful of, and then move forward from there. So I'm going to talk a little more detail about that. In terms of reporting noncompliance, we have, it's always a real issue is when are you in compliance with this permit or not? And suffice it to say that if we are not in permit waters, then we are not out of compliance with the permit. So we may have instances that we need to do rapid corrective actions before we get back in. Certainly, we'll report any releases of reportable quantities of hazardous substances or oil. And then, of course, the EPA permit has a one-time permit reporting, these additional reporting requirements as well. And the standard permitting conditions there also give very explicit discussion about what needs to be in some of these reports. So we'll talk a little bit about that. The 24-hour oil report for noncompliance, which may endanger health or the environment, and that's always sort of a question as to what would constitute a release as endangerment to human health or the environment. Certainly if we violate or exceed a daily limit of a numerical permit limit, we'll notify. If we exceed a reportable quantity, we would notify. We haven't had occasion to do that yet. Otherwise after that, it's a judgment call. There is then a 5-day written follow-up report required. And we have, in fact, had the pleasure of submitting one of those. And those timetables are very important that you stick with those, and those are elapsed time, not working days. So you can have to generate a pretty quick report in a pretty quick period of time there. Okay. What this all amounts to then, here we indicate, 14 ships, and we've got an awful lot of data relative to compliance flowing. And at least our system is to bring that information into the corporate office, and then we'll make decisions about what would be reportable and what ultimately must be reported either immediately or somewhere down the road in our annual report of noncompliance. And so it's pretty important then that we establish a robust information management system that's going to allow us to retain and retrieve that information for the subject reporting. And I know in the discussions I've given with to various audiences at one time or another, that whole issue of annual reporting of noncompliance is really something that needs to be taken very, very seriously. It's talking about all instances of noncompliance, and to the extent that your management system highlights those and then documents those, you've got to have an accurate report that your responsible corporate official can have confidence in signing. And so when we get to that, and the following steps were really pretty simple, but we found it's very important to step through all of these processes. One is you're going to get some information about, we have what we believe is a discrepancy or observed a discrepancy with the permit. And so you want to get as good a set of facts and data about that instance as you can. From there, it is absolutely essential that you go directly to the applicable effluent limitation in the permit. And one of the things that I've found, and I can tell you I've pored over this permit as much as any single document in my professional career, I guess I could say. And in some ways, some of the requirements tend to merge in your mind. There'll be a requirement for gray water, and you might find you start applying that to deck water runoff or vice versa. And so once you've identified that discrepancy or potential discrepancy, you really do need to go back into the permit and ultimately then decide, gee, okay, what's required from that effluent limit, that specific effluent limit, and then did you or did you not meet those requirements? And the example I give there is, what effluent limit applies if you overfill the potable water tank and it discharged from the vent pipe? And that answer is not quite so simple. And we've gone around and around on that a couple times and concluded that if the vent pipe goes over the side and does not run across the deck, then it's probably non-oily machinery wastewater. If it goes across the deck before going down the scupper, then it's probably deck water runoff. And there are different requirements that apply to each of those effluent limitations. So it's important that you make that determination. And then if you decide that you've got a discrepancy, then you've got to record that properly and initiate corrective actions, all those things in Section 4, and then also be prepared to report that, if not immediately, then certainly in your annual report of noncompliance. And so, of course, with the annual report, we've got to figure out where we're going to submit that report. So it's important to know what the EPA regions are. For those of you operating in the Caribbean, it's kind of unique to note that Florida would be in Region 4, but the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico will be in Region 2. We have obviously a lot of operations up here in the Northwest, so Region 10 is a likely recipient of that report at one point or another. But we'll see what it says at the end of the year. Okay. The other thing I guess I might be mindful of is this certification. And my experience here has been that it's really, really essential that the responsible official understands the gravity of this statement, because this is a statement that says, I'm responsible for assuring compliance, and I am responsible for assuring that these reports are full, accurate, and complete. And if they're not, the consequences are quite significant, in many cases more significant than the underlying violations that may or may not have been reported. I would also highlight that this certification statement coming from the permit includes the phrase that is not found in the general certification statement found in Part 122. And so you need to be sure you use the right one, and that phrase is the one that says, I have no personal knowledge that the information is submitted. So in any event, we'll move forward here. For our perspective, one of the things that we're certainly starting to see it up in Alaska is we have a very active state oversight, including an ocean ranger that's assigned to sail on board our vessels. So we're starting to get some feedback from more than one jurisdiction about the permit, and in terms of how we're doing relative to that permit. It's not at all clear that they necessarily have authority to enforce that permit, but they're certainly at least giving us feedback on that. And so we'll be dealing with that. And we can see in the future, as if we were all engaged earlier, we saw that state of California certification requirements were quite significant, and fortunately we were able to, get them to take a more realistic approach there. But that's going to come up again. And then the overall issue of state authorization and delegation of state programs is something that we'll probably see perhaps with the next iteration of the permit. And then from there, that the whole multiple jurisdiction issue relative to this moving discharge has always been significant. So there we go.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Jon. And for those of you on the webcast, we're going to be holding our questions until we have all three speakers speak so that you hear what everybody has to say. And if you have specific questions for Jon, you can start submitting them now. Please just be sure that you put Jon's name at the start of your question just so we know to direct that question to him. So with that, we're going to ask you another poll question. If you are a permittee, what steps have you taken to meet the terms of the permit? And just to let everybody know, this is a completely anonymous question, so don't be scared. We're not storing any of these data here. The possible answers are, we have fully implemented the permit, including training the crews, following the effluent limits, and meeting all the relevant terms, including inspections, corrective actions, assessments, and reporting if relevant. We have partially implemented the permit, And then also, we have not implemented any of the permit requirements. And once again, this is completely anonymous, these answers. While we're waiting for these poll results to come in, we've had a few questions come in that I'll just try to answer here very briefly. The first one asked if offshore platforms are regulated under the VGP program. And so long as the offshore platforms are not engaged in a capacity of transportation, they would not be subject to the requirements under the VGP. Basically, these particular platforms should be regulated under NPDES permits if they're within, I believe it's 200 nautical miles, under other NPDES programs. Now, when the offshore platforms are engaged in capacity of transportation, and if they have a coverage lapse, meaning they are not covered by their existing individual permit, they may be eligible for coverage under the VGP. Another simple question we've gotten is, will the webcast be archived? And yes, it will be. It'll be up in 3 to 4 weeks from today, and after we have a chance to be sure that it meets all of our various requirements for accessibility. Great. And so with that, we have the results. And it looks like many of you do think that you are meeting the full terms of the permit, 43%. And 40% of you, 41%, have partially met the terms of the permit. It looks like 16% of you have not yet implemented any of the permit requirements. And I do have to say, after seeing these numbers, that is good that people are recognizing the terms of the permit. Next time, perhaps, we answer this question, we'll be more into blue and a little bit less into the purple category. But these are good numbers, and we are providing these compliance assistance or mechanisms to help you meet the terms of the permit, these sorts of sessions, so that you may implement the permit on board your vessel as absolutely soon as possible. So, I have one more poll question for you. How significantly are you having to modify your procedures on board your vessel to meet the terms of the VGP? I've had to substantially modify my onboard procedures and record keeping as a result of the VGP. I've had to slightly modify my onboard procedures and substantially modify my record keeping. I've had to substantially modify my onboard procedures, but only slightly modify my record keeping. And I have not had to modify my onboard procedures, but substantially modify my record keeping. And then finally, I have not modified my onboard procedures or record keeping as a result of the VGP. And once again, these answers are completely anonymous. We had another question that came in that asked if the facts will be published. And these 7 fact questions that I read today, they will be published when we get the final frequently asked question document out. As I mentioned, we have about 80-something questions we've consolidated from folks, from the various questions rolling in. And we just, unfortunately, we have not been able to push it forward up to this point, but we do hope to get it out sometime in the reasonably near future. And once it is out, we will put it up on our webpage. Another question we've had, are the terms of the permit required in both U.S. and Canadian waters, or is this permit valid in both U.S. and Canadian waters? The answer is this permit is only valid in U.S. waters. We're not trying to put out any system, any international regulatory system here. This is merely a domestic Clean Water Act statute which requires the permittees, the vessels in your case, meet certain terms during the course of the permit. And so with that, we'll go on and look at the latest poll results. And it looks like approximately only 9% of folks have not had to do any modification of onboard procedures or record-keeping requirements. 23% have had to substantially modify both the procedures and requirements. And it looks like a little over 60, close to 70% of you had to somewhere between slightly and substantially modify those other requirements. So this is good to see, and thank you very much for answering this question. This helps us know the burden that we're causing the regulated community out there. So with this being said, I'd now like to have Lorena Johnston speak, who will be speaking to us about some of the issues that they've been facing in the tug and barge industry and some of the ways that they're complying with the permit here.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name's Lorena Johnston. I work for Vane Brothers. We are headquartered in Baltimore, Maryland, and we operate about 32 tugboats, 43 barges, and 2 ATVs. Like Ryan said, we are a small portion of the vessel general permit, and we had to take this big permit and dwindle it down to fit our industry. And we did this in a way that kind of simplified it for our fleet in putting together 2 books. certain way we did that is we put together 2 books, one with the vessel general permit, the fact sheet, and also the various other document requirements that we are required to have on board. And we also put together a vessel general permit records book. And that is basically what my presentation is about. Some of the discharges that we have don't cover all the discharges that the vessel general permit covers. It basically covers just 22 of those: material storage, toxic and hazardous materials, fuel spills and overflows, discharges of oil, including oily mixtures, deck washdown, runoff, bilge water, material storage, ballast water, cathodic protection, wire rope, mechanical equipment subject to immersion, fire main system, gray water, and refrigeration, air condensate discharge. So the way we did this is we put this book together. We basically went out to our fleet and we did training on board. And the first part of this book was a AWO guideline, recommended practice guide. And AWO did a really good job of incorporating all the guide, incorporating everything that we needed to know for our industry in the most practical and user-friendly way to inform our mariners of the requirements of the VGP. The AWO guide is the first component in the VGP records book, and the guide basically goes into a short introduction of the vessel general permit and then immediately covers the 22 discharges that apply to the tug and barge industry. Goes into the best management practice for each one of those discharges and short bullet points. And we found this the best way to kind of impart this information to each one of our tug and barges. It also then covers the corrective actions, inspections, record keeping, and reporting. This guide is found on the American Waterway Operators web page. So that is the first. Part of our. That is the first part of our book. Then we came up with routine inspections. We put together this guideline for our mariners, which we thought would be a helpful tool to get everybody in the fleet inspecting the equipment in a uniform way, thus avoiding any misses from boat to boat. This is merely a guideline which is meant to be a tool for them to use. Doesn't need to be recorded, and this can be changed from vessel to vessel to fit. And this can be used to from vessel to vessel to fit their specific needs. So this is something that they can take out of the book and take it around the deck with them when they do their routine inspection. And again, this is just a guideline for them to use on board that we have for them. The next tab in our records book is our next slide. This is actually where they list their routine inspections. They fill out all their pertinent information right here, and most importantly, if there is a potential problem or a potential source of contamination, this is where they would mark, yes, there is a problem, and they would then go on to the next form, which is the discrepancy form. Every single boat has, of course, per voyage or once weekly, whichever is more frequently, depending on the vessel. Sometimes that is done once a week, and other times it's done more frequently. We tried to condense this to kind of, in part, keep this as small as possible for the vessel, but keep it condensed so it wouldn't be so burdensome for them to have this huge book on board. So so we made it as small as possible. And from that tab, I'm going to go on to the corrective action form. But before I get there, we're going to talk about unmanned barges. In our case, for our unmanned equipment, we maintain the same routine inspection requirements that the rest of our fleet must comply with. Our operations department has assigned a tankerman to each one of our unmanned barge, and they are to maintain the same routine inspection requirement that the rest of our fleet has to do. In most cases, the inspections are done weekly or as otherwise required in case they have a voyage that's done more frequently. For the reporting, accidental discharges, spill notification forms, procedures, along with noncompliance notifications, they are reported to the EPA along with required authorities by the Land-Based Operations Department personnel. The crew is not required to do this. The records are required for the 3-year period, and these are required. The records are kept on board the vessel, and they're also kept. A copy is kept in the office just for safekeeping. We found that it's best that port captains perform this duty instead of our crews on board for now. As Jon stated in his presentation, these forms are living forms, and by that I mean they will continue to evolve with time as we make changes to them. This is our initial endeavor for complying with the VGP, and as we make changes, we try to make it better, and we just try to keep it as thorough as possible, and we want to make sure to include everything that we're supposed to comply with. And if anybody has any questions, my information is listed on the contact information.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Lorena. And we will be taking some questions here. So once again, just like with Jon, if you have specific questions for Lorena, please go on and submit them, and be sure you put her name first so we know to direct those questions to her. Otherwise, we may just open them up to the whole field to answer. So with that, we're going to go to our next poll question. So the poll question is, tying directly into Lorena's presentation here, how are you meeting your record-keeping and reporting and other obligations? Possible answers are, I'm keeping my records in a separate EPA VGP compliance policy or other document, much like Lorena just presented there. Another possibility, I'm integrating my record-keeping documentation into my existing systems using an ISM or SMS approach. And we've heard several different folks say this is their particular preferred approach. And then the other option is I'm integrating my record-keeping documentation into other existing documents on board the vessel. And while we're waiting for folks to submit their questions, we had a couple other questions we'll try to answer here. And one is, once the e-NOI is submitted, do you get any confirmation? And the answer is yes, you do get confirmation of that. You will, if you submit the e-NOI, you should get nearly instantaneous confirmation the e-NOI was submitted, and you should be granted coverage in very short order. Another question we're getting is somebody said they have one vessel that's larger than 300 gross tons and several vessels that are smaller than 300 gross tons. And they said, am I obligated, or do I have the option of submitting NOIs for vessels that are less than 300 tons? Now, just as a reminder to everybody, even if your vessel is under 300 tons, you're required to comply with all terms of the permit. You just do not have to submit that notice of intent, that first bit. So you're still going to have to do the one-time report, all these other things as well. Now, the answer is the system may not be able to accept NOIs for vessels less than 300 gross tons, but at EPA, we have no reason to preclude you from submitting them. We just didn't think this would be an issue most folks would be interested in doing. So with that, we'll go on and post the latest poll results. How are you meeting your record-keeping and other obligations? and approximately 51% of you are using a separate EPA VGP compliance document, and it looks like just under half are using other forms of record-keeping documentation, either ISM or SMS or some other system you've developed. And actually, I'm very happy to see this, because one of our great debates as we were writing this permit was if we would require a separate EPA VGP document or not, or if we want to try to allow folks the flexibility to integrate it into other documents. I'm glad to see that there are people out there who are using this flexibility. Another thing to note with using this as well is just be sure that the crew on board know where all these different record-keeping documents are kept on board. We've heard folks say they're using an index, or sometimes they just have a walking encyclopedia who knows exactly where every single record-keeping documentation is kept. Now, I'd like to briefly mention we actually had a very good turnout for today's webcast. It looks like we're having just over 700 people on the line right now, and as I mentioned, I don't know if that includes the folks in Hong Kong or not. We'll figure that out a little bit later. And we currently are having participants from the United States and 15 other countries, so we do have a good international audience, and we're happy to see that we are reaching a lot of different folks in different places. So, with that, I'm going to go on and turn over the presentation to Kuldeep, who's going to talk to you about some of the challenges and solutions he's found while working on his work in implementing the VGP, and then also talking to other clients and colleagues of his. So, Kuldeep?
Thanks, Ryan. First of all, let me say good day to everybody. Ryan just said that there are people from 15 countries who've signed up and dialed in. So a special welcome to everybody who are across several time zones. And my little input on this is I'm Kuldeep Singh, and I'm director with Gallagher Marine Systems. GMS is a service provider in OPA 90. We provide QI and spill management services. But besides that, we also are very actively involved in environmental compliance, both voluntary and at times court-mandated. Having said that, we're also I would say, very involved with the VGP. We have a compliance document that's put out for our clients. We do shipboard training, and we've also begun to file NOI. Let me start my little talk with giving you a piece of good news. The consensus amongst everybody that I've spoken to is that the blue water fleet, which actually is ships that are outside in the ocean, are most likely to be fully compliant as soon as possible. So with that, this goes out to all those people in those 15 countries that are listening to the Webcast. That's good news. What are we going to look at? What are we discussing here today? Challenges posed by VGP and some of the solutions, suggested solutions to these challenges. I know that we've had two previous speakers who are very eloquent and they detailed specific questions. I'm going to be very generalized in this. We all know what the VGP is about now, so I'm going to take up what could be the challenges posed. The general issues with compliance, and I think these are general issues not only with compliance with the VGP, but general issues with compliance with any new regulation that is coming up. We all know that several new regulations have come up, and several dozens of them actually, and they're ever-changing, they're very quick. The interval between proposal and promulgation is very short, and it is shortening as we speak. We know that SOLAS 1948 was there for a long period of time, and then we had SOLAS in the 60s that remained for a long period of time. But we know in the last 5 years, the SOLAS has been amended several times. So these regulations, the frequency of the change is very rapid. There is a rising burden for ship staff and for the management. And this burden is actually, one of the burdens could be record keeping, but there's several other burdens that are rising up. The other important thing here is that training lags regulations, and this is very pertinent. The end user of any regulation is the seafarer. And because the training lags the regulations, we have a slip between the cup and the lip. The several new regulations cause a lot of confusion amongst the crew. There are vessel design limitations, and these are not inherent. These are not designs because the vessel was inadequate, but because the changing regulations have made some vessel design limited. There are compliance costs, and the compliance costs are not only monetary, there are compliance costs in resources, etc., which is another challenge that comes up. So we will now look at some of the VGP-specific challenges. Now, there are two ways to look at any new regulation, not only the VGP, is be morose about it or be eager and take it up as a challenge. And I think we have no recourse but to be eager and take it up as a challenge. The VGP is actually got vast ramifications. It's got a vast scope. There are 26 affluent discharge streams which are incidental to normal operation of vessels. We know that. Several of them may not apply to every type of vessel, but as Lorena said a little while ago, 20-odd apply to the barge industry, so to speak, and not all of these apply to all vessels in the industry. But since it's a vast scope, and the thinking and the operation mindset of the management and the vessel both requires to change. So I will break it up into two parts, compliance challenges for the management and compliance challenges on board. We've seen some poll questions that indicated you require to review our existing policies, and that is so true. Even though VGP, as I will mention later somewhere down in my presentation, is achievable, but you need require to review your existing policies and see if they're aligned with the VGP or not. If they're not aligned with the VGP, then either amend, add, or keep procedures distinctly separate from your existing system. And on a personal note, I recommend that you keep the VGP procedures and policies distinctly separate from the system. There could be some listeners who represent class. I think a time might come when class would question how can you have two different systems existing on the same ship. But right now, I think that's my recommendation in this matter. The other challenge is to disseminate the VGP requirements. By disseminating, I do not mean just sending a circular or document across to the vessel, but to make sure that the crew understands what is required to be done. Plan and execute crew training. In the VGP document, there are several locations where if you search, you will find the word training. Specific training such as required on tankers, etc. Besides that training, you also require to holistically train your crew to understand the VGP, the entire VGP to understand that. So these are two kinds of training that I'm mentioning. One is what is specifically required by the VGP, and the other that is required to make the crew understand and follow the requirements of the VGP. Then you require to institute practical record keeping and documentation. By practical record keeping and documentation, I mean the crew is already burdened. And that's been my refrain right from the beginning, that they've already been burdened. The record keeping should be practical and achievable. Then you require to institute policies and practices so that you have continued compliance, vessel compliance. By this, I do not mean if your vessel does not call VGP mandated waters, then you're obviously not required to be in compliance with that for that period of time. But continued compliance would be like annual inspections. You might want to incorporate these annual inspections into your quality audits or your ISM audits somehow so that you have assurance and you do due diligence that you know that the vessel is in compliance. And lastly, familiarize new hires. So obviously you will have to have policies in place that your new hire document for orientation incorporates the requirements of the VGP. Then you've got practical challenges from management perspective. The comprehensive annual inspection as an example, I mentioned it a little while earlier. You might want to incorporate that in your ISM, ISO audit. Even though you might want to keep the documentation distinctly separate, but the same superintendent auditor that boards for the ISM, ISO audit could do the annual inspection. There are provisions in the VGP that some of the class records, and we will look at them, some of the class records are acceptable for the annual inspection, so we could also use those. But as long as the ship's crew, ship staff, and officers understand what these documents are so that they can be produced in the event of an inspection, that's the important part. You already have an existing corrective action system. The corrective action system, what you have, probably if you review that against the VGP, fulfills the requirements of the VGP, so you may not want to change that. However, the VGP suggests a corrective action system which you could look at. The dilemma exists, should I be compliant perennially or throughout the year or within 3 nautical miles? And I think this has been addressed in previous questions, in the previous question and answers also by Dr. Albert. So I will not get into this. Effectively, in brief, if you are calling the United States within the 3 nautical miles and calling a port of the U.S., you will require to have one set of weekly inspections. You'll have to do one. I'm not saying will have to, but that's my understanding. You will have to do one quarterly sampling. And if it's been a year since your last annual inspection, then you require a comprehensive annual inspection too. You have to begin to start looking at dry docking a little separately, because several of the requirements of the VGP are fulfilled by some dry docking practices and policies. So you would require, as management, to look at incorporating these practices into your dry dock practices so that you fulfill the VGP requirements. And now this is, the last one is considered retrofitting and design review. Is a little radical, but I think time will come where some vessels will require to look at design changes, maybe not existing ships, but newer ships being delivered, such as deck washdown holding tanks, shoulder tanks on top and the aft, something of this nature, like dump valves on tankers, like dump valves into the slop tanks on tankers. Similar designs may have to be looked at for bulk carriers. Incidentally, in my opinion, the class of vessels that will have the biggest challenge will be the bulk carriers, specifically with deck washdown and runoff. The grabs, when they're discharging by grabs, as an example, a lot of the residue falls on deck. Now, will that be a non-compliance if that runs off? What is the standard for that? Will it be required to be reported? All these issues need to be carefully considered by the management when you're writing out your written policies for the ships. The second class of vessels that are going to be affected more than the others are the container vessels after the dry bulk or the bulk ships, dry bulk ships. And I think the least affected I'm not saying least affected, they're as affected, but the vessels which require least implementation of new procedures and policies would be the tankers, the LPGs, and the LNGs, because some of these practices and policies pre-exist the VGP, including training requirements that are specific to tankers. You probably require a mindset change for bulk carriers, specifically as far as the crew is concerned. This is one example of a dry dock statement survey under United States NPDES and VGP permit. I'm not sure if you can read the part in detail, but effectively this is class providing a statement. I would not call it a certificate. It's a statement, and that's what it says, is that certain due diligence was conducted as far as the VGP is concerned, and these records are available on board for presentation to an inspector if he or she was aboard the vessel. So this is one example of one manager doing certain level of due diligence. Having spoken about the management challenges, let us look at some of the challenges that the ship's crew faces. And the ship's crew faces fairly unique challenges as far as the VGP is concerned. The sentiment on board is not another one. Not another one, please. We've had enough coming up. And That's quite justifiable, considering that the industry is moving at a fast pace as far as regulation is concerned. There is some catch-up that the industry is doing specifically with the environmental issues. So the ship's people are not amenable, to say the least, with new regulations. The vessel has got some specific challenges. Are tools and resources available to comply with the BGP? Now, the tools specifically may not be equipment, but the tools could be just training, orientation, dissemination of information, etc. Are these available to comply? The crew has, not because they cannot assimilate, but the crew has an inability to assimilate large regulations, because in this time and age with so much happening, the crew gets a lot of information. Shipboard training is also an important part. Inspection and monitoring is the important part. Do they have the expertise and knowledge? Corrective action of the management is an important part. Managing the corrective action, I think John addressed that. Record keeping regular and accurate. Do they know that some of the dried up records are part of the VGP records, etc.? External verification and crew ability. These are some of the challenges that the crew faces. Now, the solution. Actually, I have also seen the document, and the company has seen the document very carefully, and I really think that the VGP is extremely achievable. It's an adaptive, allows the use of existing systems. It's based on a quality system template. It is simple, best management practices, even though this could cause a little bit of a problem when two vessels are being compared for best management practices. It's practical, it's procedure-driven, and the continuous improvement mantra that already exists, that's what it is right now. So I think it's very achievable. The important thing being here, the document is based on self-inspection, self-monitoring, and self-reporting. So effectively, it is designed for internal command and control, so to speak. It is something that you need to do yourself, develop yourself, and do it yourself. You have the standards available, but you need to develop your procedures yourself. Having said that, it's easy to comply with. I think I need to point out that non-compliance is, it could be extremely expensive. As you can see from here, fines could range as much as $37,500 per violation per day. Now, I have to point out here that this is the maximum penalty for extremely acute cases, and it may not be for every individual non-compliance, but it has a scope for reaching that amount. And not informing correctly could also cause you, or not giving the correct information could also be a punitive fine of $10,000. There's also the specter of imprisonment. The nonconformities constitutes a violation of the Clean Water Act. Each day a violation constitutes a separate violation of this permit. That needs to be kept in mind, that the penalty for not compliance can be quite severe. I will leave you with what I call pondering points, or points to ponder. The cruise industry already has an environmental person on board. I think the rest of the shipping industry might want to consider, considering the complex nature of regulations being promulgated, somebody that overall gets a bird's eye view of all environmental issues on board. There are certain vessel designs that pre-exist. Dump valves on slop tanks and non-tank vessels might be looked at if you do have a tank that could be dedicated for deck washdown, deck retention fish plates that exist on tankers, sampling cocks to be installed for your quarterly sampling, container vessels with large cargo bilge holding capacity. You might want to review the amount of bilge holding capacity you have. Impress current systems and electrical marine growth systems for pipelines might want to be considered. Use of non-marine pollutant lubricants for mooring buys. So there are several like this that you might want to look at. And with this, I come to the end of my little discussion that I had on this matter. If you have any questions, you can address them. Go ahead. Take it over, Ryan.
I sure will. Thank you very much, Kuldeep. That was a very informative presentation, and I know that many of our colleagues back at EPA tuned into this presentation so that we could hear what Jon, Lorena, and Kuldeep had to say as well today, so we really do greatly appreciate it. Once again, if you all do have questions, please submit them to us here via the question interface, and if you have a specific question for Kuldeep, please go on and put Kuldeep's name first. With that, I'm going to go on and start asking each of you some questions and put you on the hot seat, and I will start with Lorena. Lorena, the question is for you. Have you had to conduct any corrective action assessments or reporting, and if so, what did that involve?
We have had reporting of accidental spill, and we call the 24-hour line in our EPA sector, and we also turned in the paperwork, the 26 Coast Guard 2692. That sufficed. So we called and turned in that as a report to our regional office.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Jon, have you had a similar situation with any of your vessels of needing to do any corrective action assessments or reporting?
Yeah, certainly. And I guess the example I might draw on is I think Lorena is described exactly what we would do if we had sort of an accidental release, such as an oil spill. Relative to a wastewater discharge, we did have one exceedance of an effluent limit, which generated certainly a 24-hour report, and then a more significant corrective action and follow-up there. And I should say, one of the things, when we get to those 5-day reports, it's my professional practice from days long gone that 5-day follow-up report is your best opportunity to present your best case as to what happened and what you've done to correct it and what you've done to initiate activity to prevent a recurrence. And in my experience, that's been your best opportunity to convince regulators to exercise enforcement discretion. And so I would encourage you to use that opportunity similarly. The other point I would make is one of the things we find, depending on the circumstance, that whole corrective action process, depending on the circumstance, can really evolve over time. And your corrective action plan itself can become a living document as you get more information and figure out what it is that works or didn't work. And it's important to note that the corrective action assessment requirement specifies that you are to have a schedule for corrective action. That means times and dates. And while if you don't meet those times and dates, you can modify that plan, you've got to keep that plan up to date to indicate that you have a plan in place and you're working actively to initiate that corrective action.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Jon, and thank you, Lorena, for that. Kuldeep, we have a separate question for you. Why do you recommend keeping the VGP procedures separate from existing procedures? And this question comes from Delton.
Ryan, this is a good question. Actually, it's been debated by several people in several companies. The only reason why I say to keep it separate is, number one, is the ease of retrieval. If it gets mired, I won't say mired, but if it gets filed away in the existing documentation or the existing records, it is difficult to produce. That is one. And secondly, the other reason why I say it should be kept separate is I'm not sure many shipping companies or operators are going to keep the requirement for the VGP perennial, irrespective of whether they fly in the 3 nautical mile waters of the U.S. or not. In other words, if the ship does not come for 1 year, you tend to forget, the ship's crew could tend to forget, there's a possibility, that they are required to do something when they go back because it's not been done for a long period of time. So if you keep it separate, it becomes a check-off list for calling U.S. waters, and that is the reason why I said to keep it separate.
Good. Thank you. All right, we have another question for Lorena. For records pertaining to unmanned barges, are you actually keeping the records on the barge? Where on the barge are you keeping them?
We are keeping the records on the barge for unmanned barges, and what we're doing is our unmanned barges actually have a small little, so to speak, a shack on on them where they keep the operations manuals and oil transfer procedures on there. So the binder is kept on board.
Great, thank you, and I think that will answer the question. Let's see. Bear with me, you all. We have quite a few questions coming in. I want to be sure to get to some of the most pertinent ones here. Kuldeep, this is a question for you. For regular or standard deballasting operations on a ship, who do you have who is responsible for the paperwork? Is it the ship, the agent, or the port captain? And this question comes from Tony.
Predominantly what I have seen, in fact, I would say 99%, the reporting and documentation responsibility lies with the vessel. In other words, the master of the ship would keep the records on board and also send the ballast water exchange information as required to various states. I think it is difficult for somebody external to the vessel to keep these records and to send the report.
Good. Thank you very much, Kuldeep. John, we have a question for you here. What equipment besides oily water separators on Holland America's vessels fall under the definition of pollution control equipment?
Well, certainly the advanced wastewater, the Type 2 MSDs on board, and we don't discharge Type 2 MSDs in permit waters, but our advanced wastewater purification equipment would count. On one of our vessels, we have a development project with seawater scrubber, which is designed to treat for sulfur dioxide and particulate emissions coming out of an engine, and so that would be a piece of pollution control equipment as well as operated in there. I think you could probably extend it to things like deck scupper grates or things like that. I don't know that we quite consider them that way, but those are really the two then that we've got, and I'm trying to think in terms of even what I don't think we would consider, for example, evaporators as pollution control equipment per se, though certainly there's a lot of equipment on board. If it fails, could be pollution generating equipment, so you need to maintain that equipment in good working order, regardless of whether you would call it a pollution control equipment or not.
Great, thank you. I think that was a very clear answer. We do have a few minutes to answer additional questions, and we have also posted the speaker's contact information in case you would like to contact them after today. I do want to reemphasize that we are getting a substantial number of questions in here, and we will not be able to answer them all today. We are also sending out a webcast evaluation, which should soon appear on your screen. Please consider completing this survey and let us know your thoughts. Click on the Enlarge Slides button to view and complete this survey. And once again, we do appreciate your feedback. This will serve to us to be a very useful tool as we develop future webcasts and know what sorts of compliance assistance and other materials to present for you all. Now, we do have some additional time for other questions as you are completing the survey, and we will walk through and do a few more of these, but we just have to put the plug in for the survey because, like I said, it was information presented by you all, the regulated community, in the last survey, which really contributed us inviting Jon, Kuldeep, and Lorena to speak to us today. So we have a question here, and I think this is probably an appropriate question for either Kuldeep or for Jon. Some vessels carry and ballast municipal water only and are not required to adhere to ballast water management. How will this affect their vessels and complying with the VGP? And you all please feel free to opine on it, and I can jump in as well if you would like.
Sorry, Ryan, could you repeat the question quickly, please?
I would be happy to. It just popped off my screen, though, so just give me 2 seconds, and hopefully I can find it back here.
Maybe Jon can respond.
All right, Jon, you want to give it a shot? Well, I'll tell you what. I'll be happy to answer this one. This is one of those wonderful moments where technology is perhaps too efficient at getting rid of the asked questions. My personal interpretation of that question would be, for ballast water, you still have to have a ballast water management plan, even if you have potable water. And that ballast water management plan may be 3 sentences, which effectively state, we use potable water as our ballast water management, and in case of emergency, we have to use other ballast water. These are the procedures we will follow. The other very important thing to note is ballast water is but one of 26 discharge types regulated under the vessel general permit. You will still have other requirements that likely may be applicable to your vessel, including some general housekeeping requirements, and then also some requirements for other elements under the permit. So do go take a look at the permit, read it directly, and please be sure to read over it and find what terms are actually applicable for your vessel. Okay. Now, Kuldeep, we have a question for you about the logistics of implementation. The question basically asks, if a bulk carrier were to use tarps to cover the exposed deck from the hatch combing to dock to prevent bulk cargo spillage, would that eliminate deck wash water compliance requirements? And this comes once again from Tony.
Well, it depends on how effective the cover is, Tony. I would say that if you can eliminate leaching or wash-off, and depending on what cargo you're covering, it may not actually be a contaminant to begin with, but even then, Clean Water Act talks about discoloration of water, so you have to be careful. It would be a definite as far as due diligence is concerned that you are taking a precaution to prevent the spillage as far as practicable, but it would not eliminate, it may not eliminate the fact that you could be in non-compliance.
Great, excellent. Thank you very much, Kuldeep. So we have another question. This one looks like it is directed to Lorena. And the question is, in your opinion, what documentation is required for unmanned work barges?
In my opinion, for unmanned work barges, the documentation requires everything that's required for manned work barges or all other vessels. We basically set the same standard for unmanned barges that we do for our other equipment. The inspections may not be as frequent because of the workload, but it's exactly the same.
Good. Excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we have, okay. Whoops, that one's the one I already asked, Kuldeep. I'm sorry. And once again, you all bear with me as I have several questions coming in. Now, Kuldeep, this question is for you. Have you found that there are any specific requirements as to who is authorized to conduct the comprehensive annual inspection?
The VGP addresses this. The VGP says that the person should be competent to do the authorized inspection, the annual inspection. Effectively, it also talks about some of what classification societies do could be part of the annual inspection, such as annual IOPP endorsement, as an example, because it signifies that the equipment on board is as per regulation, etc. So effectively, the annual inspection could also be done by the master and chief engineer on board a ship. But a lot of people are gravitating to superintendent doing the annual inspection as probably as part of the annual ISM audit, the requirement of the ISM audit. So the VGP has addressed who can be authorized, and effectively these are the 3 or 4 entities that could do it.
Okay, great. And Lorena's going to speak up here as well.
The permit also, just to add to that, the VGP defines the qualified personnel as the master or operator of the vessel or appropriately trained marine or environmental engineers or technicians or an appropriately trained representative of a vessel class society acting on behalf of the owner or operator. That's what the actual permit states, which is basically paraphrasing.
Great, Lorena. Thank you very much. And if she keeps going to the permit like that, we might have to try to hire away from Vane Brothers here before too terribly long at EPA. So another question for you, Jon. In your opinion, who makes the ultimate decision regarding the VGP coverage, taking into account the following: with respect to vessels in seasonal or extended layup, abandoned vessels, abandoned vessels, the issue of precisely when such vessel ceases operating capacity as a means of transportation will necessarily depend upon the specific facts presented.
When when asking who makes that determination, I'm wondering if the questioner is wondering about, say, a charterer or an owner versus an operator, and so I'm not really sure. And I guess I would default back to sort of your discussion previously about whomever has ultimate operational control. More specifically, frankly, we don't have that circumstance. We don't lay up our vessels, and if we decided we're done with them, we'll sell them. So I think maybe, Ryan, you could probably answer that better than I can at this point.
Great, thank you. And I will direct that question to our commercial vessel permit mailbox to get a response from us. We have limited time with you all, so we want to be sure to emphasize those points. John, you can answer this question as well. Have you received any feedback from EPA on interpretation or implementation decisions that you have made? And this comes from Ian.
I don't think so, other than sort of some of the informal conversations that we've had. And I know that even in the last week or so, we've said, well, I talked earlier about the sort of this potable water issue, and I didn't hear anything back. So I guess I sort of assumed that didn't seem to raise any alarms. I would say, as a general statement, I think I've been very comfortable with the interpretations that we've made. I think in any permitting situation, there are circumstances where you'll need to make an interpretation as you apply a general document to your operations. And I think it is within the realm of professional judgment to, from time to time, you are looking at making an interpretation that you need to decide on, and generally on a conservative basis, but whether or not your interpretation passes the laugh test, is otherwise sympathetic to your operations. And so, every day we make those kind of interpretations on a compliance issue, whether it's relative to this permit or not. And while I have not sought specific feedback on any of these interpretations, I haven't felt that we've really come across really difficult ones that give me a lot of pause for concern.
Great. Thank you very much, John. And we just have time for a couple more questions, and we'll kind of come out of the get a little bit more to specifics here. A question for all three of you all. Have any of you used the batch upload e-NOI feature? And if so, what is your general recommendation to the rest of the vessel universe?
Vane Brothers has used the batch, upload, and I think if you are under the 100 vessel limit or close to it, I would definitely not go that route just because the user friendliness is not the best. That was my personal experience with it. I don't know what John and Kuldeep have to say about that.
Brian, we've also had issues with batch load up for the NOI, and specifically you've got to go back and then start incorporating individual vessel information into the batch. So sometimes the benefit of batch is limited. That is one of the issues that we've had, and I leave the rest of it for John to take up.
We're certainly planning on using the batch process.
Great. Excellent. Thank you very much. It's good to hear all the opinions, and as we design these tools at EPA, it's good to know what works well, what works but maybe not so well, and then what doesn't work, of course, at all. I do have just a final couple concluding remarks. First of all, I was giving the folks in Hong Kong a little bit of grief perhaps, and I have heard they are on the line and have been the entire time, and we have a message basically reflecting that. I would like to, on behalf of EPA, thank today's speakers very much for joining us. We very much value the input you have to assisting other permittees in meeting the terms of the permit requirements, and I think it's very good that they see the examples that you all are using on board your vessels. We think this is a wonderful tool. Once again, I would like to remind everyone that the opinions expressed by the various speakers are their own and are not necessarily endorsed by us at EPA. However, we have seen what these particular permittees are doing, and we thought that they would deliver a very good message to you all in terms of what they are doing to meet the permit terms. At this time, I'd like to conclude today's webcast, and once again, thank you all. Thank you, Jenny, very much. Thank you, Lorena, John, and Kuldeep for joining us today. And thank you to everybody who joined us for this webcast. And if you have additional questions on the VGP, please do send them to commercialvesselpermit@epa.gov. Thank you.